of the League of Women Voters of Volusia County, and I am thrilled to have you with us tonight for this very important presentation on a topic that really affects every Volusia County resident, and that is growth management. I would venture to guess that on our way here tonight, just about all of us probably saw some signs of growth, whether it be a retail outlet or a strip mall or a housing development or some road work or acres and acres of land for sale that will soon be filled with buildings of some sort. And certainly there are some benefits. It brings jobs to the area. It provides those of us that live here with some access to other amenities and restaurants, but it also has some real potential to affect us in many other ways, particularly with our infrastructure. When we think of our roads and our bridges, our water, what are we going to have to do to make sure we all have clean drinking water in the future? And also our green spaces. The more we build, how do we preserve our green spaces to protect those so that we maintain the quality of life that we so love here in Volusia County? It is a huge question. It is very complex, and we are thrilled to have two local experts with us tonight who know this area and know the things that are happening in Volusia. And they're going to take us through where we are and where we're going with some insights about the issues and some possible things that we need to think about as we come together as a community to decide what we need for development and what we need to do to protect our quality of life. Before we bring our speakers up, however, I want to thank one of our members, Sarah Lee Morrissey, for jumping right in and working with our speakers to bring us this presentation tonight. We can't do that without the behind-the-scene work of members like Sarah Lee, who herself is an expert. She is the Director of Planning and Construction and has been for a number of years with Volusia County Schools, and development directly affects what she does every day. So thank you, Sarah Lee, for that. Thank you to our speakers, and I'm going to ask you to introduce them.
All right.
And thank you for being with us.
We have a great turnout tonight, and I know that Clay, Lois, and I are very pleased to see everyone here. And just in case you all thought that Volusia County doesn't do planning, that map is a 1969 map of the 1993 future land use plan for Volusia County. And I will tell you, my husband and I had so much fun staring at that map over our kitchen table and saying, no, that's not here. Why is that? I can tell you why that one's not here. And for those of us who've been in planning and development for as long as Lois, Clay, and I have, there's a number of reasons why the best laid plans don't always work out the way you envision them. But the purpose of planning is to ensure that we are thinking ahead and we are doing the very best that we can to make the arrangements that we need for the future. So I am very pleased to introduce two of my colleagues. I have worked with both Lois and Clay for a number of years. Lois Bollenback has been with us in Volusia County for almost 20 years now in the field of transit and transportation planning. Before she came to Volusia, she worked in quality control at the Kennedy Space Center, and we can all thank her for her years of service with the U.S. Air Force. After returning from active duty, Lois enrolled in UCF, where she earned a bachelor's degree in business administration and then a master's degree in applied economics. She moved here to Volusia County in 1999, where she became the bicycle pedestrian planner for our TPO, and you'll see that acronym. TPO is Transportation Planning Organization, and that's where I first met Lois. She went on to work for a private consultant, Giabi & Associates, who does transportation planning, and she then went to our transit provider, which we all know as Votran. Votran is actually a private entity, and she was assistant general manager for Votran. She came back to the TPO, where she's been since 2009 as our executive director, and I will just say, as someone who has sat in a number of what I think are the most challenging meetings that the TPO has, and that is when there's at least 30 elected officials in the room. She commands the floor very, very well, and she helps to ensure that the chair runs a very good and productive meeting. And you've always made me proud watching that. And I've never wanted to have your role. And then also with us tonight is Clay Ervin, who is the Director of Growth and Resource Management for Volusia County, and I've had the pleasure of working with Clay for a number of years. Clay brings with him the stature of being a fourth-generation native Floridian. And he has been a planner since 1985. He moved here to Volusia County in 1994, where he became the planning director for the city of Ormond Beach, and that's where I first began my work with Clay. He's worked with a number of our local governments and also some private consultants here in the area, but he now holds another enviable position, and he's been the director since 2016. And so without further ado, we're going to start this with Lois.
Y'all don't mind turn out the lights so we can actually see the screen.
Totally.
Well, is that better?
After all
That's
these years
good.
of learning to make eye contact with the crowd. So as Sarah Lee mentioned, I am the director of the River to Sea Transportation Planning Organization. And really the TPO is a board of elected officials that represents each city that's in our planning area, as well as each of the counties. And we cover all of Volusia County and a portion of Flagler County. And so as Sarah Lee mentioned, we have 19 voting officials, but there's actually 25 elected officials that join our meetings every month. So it's a lot of communication, a lot of trying to make sure that one entity is talking to another about their future, about their plans, and hopefully getting folks to find common ground, which sometimes is a challenge. And TPOs or MPOs, Metropolitan Planning Organizations, were put in place years ago for areas that start to urbanize. So when you're a small rural area, you have very few needs. Maybe a stop sign or a traffic signal, right? Your roads aren't expanding, it's very quiet. It's not too difficult to determine your future or deal with your issues. When you start to grow, you can see, and this is just really a partial matrix. First of all, there's lots of acronyms that you have to learn, but there's different funding sources. People want to travel and get around in different ways. You have a whole bunch of problems that start to crop up that you need to address, like safety or traffic congestion, air quality and pollution. And so MPOs were put in place to help coordinate those activities. Now, when it comes to transportation planning, there's state money, there's federal money, and there's local money. MPOs really focus on state and federally funded projects. So that's our portion. Clay is going to talk to you about the local portion. But surely, for a system to work, all three of those levels of government and government funding have to be healthy and work and communicate together. So MPOs were started back in 1962, and you may remember back in the 50s, Eisenhower decided to build an interstate system. And it seemed like a great idea, but there was some unintended consequences. And so what happened was he started building all these freeways, and these small towns, and in some cases cities all around the nation, said, whoa, wait a second. Well, there's no communication mechanism between local government and federal government. And so that was one of the reasons MPOs were put in place, not just to help overall with all that coordination and communication, but to make sure that local government had a say in what was happening with federal planning and state planning. So again, this MPOs provide that mechanism. We get to set the priorities for all of the projects, the new projects that come out of this planning area. And so each year, we create priority lists, and we send those over to the Department of Transportation, who often is the agency that will construct and allocate the funding based on local priorities. The other power of an MPO is to say, no, thank you. So state and federal authorities cannot come in and build something that we don't believe is good for our local community. And so again, that was the power put in place. You can't put an interstate right through the center of our city if we think that's bad. You can't put it through a low-income community and devastate that community or bisect that community. So that's one of the powers, a little ahead of ourselves, of the MPO. So I mentioned we cover all of Volusia County and a portion of Flagler County. We have an urbanized area in the west side of the county and an urbanized area that kind of strings all along the coast, which if you looked at the state of Florida, you would see that's not unusual, right? Most people are living close to the coast, and these urbanized areas in some cases are bleeding together. Whereas if you are in some other parts of the country, you see more of a central business district that kind of spans out. So it's a little different, the growth patterns here in Florida. And again, we are tasked, and the verbiage in law is continuing, cooperative, and comprehensive. So we have to cover all modes of transportation and community planning. We have a board that meets every month. We also have a citizens, a technical, and a bicycle and pedestrian committee that are represented from, again, all of the different cities in the county, and they provide advisory comments to our board before they act. So there's a strong public involvement component. So these are our main activities. The first one is our long-range plan. And so we try to look 25 years out into the future, and we predict where growth and development is going to occur. So we identify population centers and employment centers, and we throw a lot of that information into this sophisticated traffic model, and it tries to calculate and forecast where we will have traffic congestion. And it is primarily a traffic model. It's primarily in our area, that is how people get around. Once we identify where there's going to be congestion, we start talking about how we're going to resolve that. The answer is not always to widen a road, right? So there's plenty of roads, A1A, US 1, State Road 44, that run right through a city, and they don't want to widen those roads any further. So then the question is, what do you do? What are the tools in the toolbox that we can use to help create some relief to that congestion? We'll talk about that in a minute. Out of that 25-year plan, which is where we just identify all of the funding, all of the projects, try to determine what we can build with the money that we will have available, we have a 5-year program. And in that 5-year program, we start pulling projects out of that long-range plan to actually implement. And that's generally based on the growth and development that's occurring and the real issues that we're seeing in our community. And you can imagine we might be a little bit backlogged in some areas with that. We also do a lot of planning studies. We are, by definition, a planning organization, T, capital P-O. So we have done a variety of studies, regional studies, area-wide studies. And again, these are extensions of planning staff in your cities or in the county. We work a lot with each of these agencies to try and identify issues that maybe have a more broad context and try to identify issues and be proactive in taking care of them. And then we do feasibility studies as well, because sometimes our smaller local governments have thin staff and they just don't have the opportunity to really vet studies that they might need. School safety studies might be a good example. We worked with Sarah Lee quite a few years ago to start doing studies around safety studies for bicycle and pedestrian access for students to all elementary and middle schools. We've done all the schools in Volusia County and Flagler County at this point, trying to implement improvements to circulation of buses, parent drop-off, kids trying to get in and out to improve safety. So this is how we spend a lot of our time. And there's a few areas that are a focus for us right now. Of course, we do our annual call for projects and priorities. That's just getting started. We just issued our call for projects recently. A good majority of those come right out of our long-range plan, but then there are also set-asides that we do at a program level. So your city can apply for sidewalks, for trail projects, for intersection improvements, smaller operational improvements on the roadway network that can help increase efficiency. Right now, advanced technology is a giant focus for transportation, and anybody that reads a newspaper or a magazine or listens to NPR, you hear stories about technology that's coming out. Autonomous vehicles, safety features on vehicles, connected traffic signals. Our NPO has been very proactive in trying to fund these projects that involve infrastructure. All of the technology exists. The question is, how quickly can it be implemented? How fast will we adapt to it? Does anybody here have a car with advanced safety features, self-parking, lane? One person? How about an electric vehicle or a hybrid electric vehicle? A couple of us. Thank you for that. That's all coming, especially fully electric vehicles, because most of this technology that they would like to roll out operates better in an electric vehicle. And so this technology is going to, and when we talk about the future, this is really challenging. 25 years from now, how is this going to shape? What's going to happen to gas stations if we have all electric vehicles? What's going to happen to parking garages if there are lots of autonomous vehicles and people don't have 3 or 4 cars in a household, right? Ken, how many cars do you have? There's just 2 of you at home. How many do you have?
2.
Just 2? That's pretty good. That's pretty good. Some people have 3 or 4, and there's just 2 of them living at home. Because there's the cars that you commute in, and then there's the cars that you have to launch a boat with, and then there's a car that's fun. Resiliency is very important. We've done a couple of studies in Flagler and Volusia County, where transportation is particularly affected. We want to make sure that after a severe storm, emergency vehicles can get back out onto the roadway. Of course, we want to make sure that people can evacuate if necessary during a storm or preceding a storm. But again, if you're going to evacuate, you should do that well in advance of a storm. So we wouldn't have a flooding issue then, but on your return, there might be a problem. Of course, we all saw what happened with A1A a few years ago, especially up in Flagler, but a little bit in Volusia as well. We've got threatening conditions to our built environment, and we need to be realistic about them. Safety is also a big focus for us right now, and if you've seen the data or the statistics, you know. A report just came out the other day that's issued every couple of years. You probably saw that in the news journal, Dangerous by Design, and it focuses on pedestrian and bicycle injuries and fatalities. We have a very dubious record here in Volusia County. Florida is at the top of the nation. Volusia County is always in the top 10 of the state. But even beyond bicycle and pedestrian injuries and fatalities, we have auto fatalities that are at, quite frankly, an alarming rate around the nation. Generally, a lot of these are speed related. Distracted driving happens 5 times more often than any other crash type. Don't know exactly, but I'm pretty sure that's the culprit. We have been doing a number of studies to try and get down to what can we do as an NPO. We can identify areas where there are lots of crashes and try to engineer a fix. But at the end of the day, it's each of us that are behind the wheel. If you choose to drink and drive, if you choose to drive when you are very, very tired, the very dangerous time to be walking around as a pedestrian is a Friday evening. So we know darkness factors into that, right? But there's got to be some other things. drinking, maybe you're blowing off steam at the end of a work week, you're tired. There's gotta be more to it than it's a Friday evening that creates the problem. Drinking and driving, if you look at a map of the county, it's everywhere. You might think, oh, maybe it's gonna be beachside, Daytona area where there's all the clubs. It is everywhere throughout the county. Again, these are human behavior issues, and I don't know as an MPO that we can engineer our way out of that. We can try to slow traffic down. We can put more lighting out there and make safer crosswalks. But ultimately, the pedestrian and the driver have to make better decisions. And so we're gonna work on some public service announcements and also try to partner more closely with law enforcement to address that. The other thing that we can do that will help, and this goes back to the growth management issue, and that is, how do we make our land use decisions? If we are locating a hotel across the street, a 5-lane road from a restaurant or a convention center, people are going to want to make that trip. And they're not going to walk far to a crosswalk to do it. So we've got to do a better job in how we locate our different land uses and make sure that there is good accessibility and pedestrian circulation. My office is right off of International Speedway Boulevard, very close to Michael's, or Total Wine, or Haverty's, depending on your shopping preferences. There's 24 restaurants within easy walking distance of, when I say easy, I mean distance. None of them are easy to get to. There is not a sidewalk I can take to a single one of those restaurants. I have to go through hedges and swales and across medians. There is a sidewalk out that leads from the complex out to International Speedway, and there's about an 8-foot gap of grass where the road project ends and the site itself ends. And so there's a gap, and nobody thought to, when they were pouring the forms, to close that gap. So it's very, very frustrating that we just have these built environment challenges that we need to continue to work on. Public involvement is big in the world I work in. I do a lot of presentations like this. We're only an 8-person staff, but we were in the newspaper 72 times last year. We spend a lot of time trying to get, that could be a watermark really across that instead of a bullet, because it is a part of everything that we do at our organization to try and get the word out.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
You mentioned what we're going to do with the gas stations, but you didn't answer that, because we're getting 120 that are going to be put in. So what kind of planning is
That, well, and again, each city is going to have their own answer to that. I'm not sure that if you were building a development right now, that you shouldn't have infill plans.
120 gas?
No.
They're going to be replaced with CVS's and Walgreens. They're on every corner. I'm not sure. I'm not really sure. You know, we don't know the time frames for some of this. Well, there's a lot of debate over how quickly people are going to transition, just like with shared vehicles. There's a big debate over what is the vehicle sharing going to do in our community. So up in New York City, where they have a lot of Uber and Lyft, they had to actually cap the number of Uber and Lyft drivers, because what happened was, it was so convenient and so affordable, people stopped using the subway. They didn't stop, but so many more people, and all of a sudden they were back to a traffic congestion issue. So we like to think that it's going to change and create more freedom, but there's going to be this transition period that is going to be challenging, and mass transit can't go away. As a matter of fact, I was at a presentation in South Florida with the Florida vice president for Uber, and he said, you know, they track all their trips, and they can see all of these trips converge on a single kind of main thoroughfare. and all of these cars are lined up, and he said, that's transit. That's where transit should be. And what they're trying to struggle with is, who provides that? Does the transit provider provide that? Or does Uber and Lyft figure out how to provide that? You know, now, when you sign up for a trip, you can sign up for a shared ride. You can carpool on your trip, and it cuts your price tremendously. So again, to follow up on Sarah Lee's, this was the cover of Popular Science magazine in 1950, and it was how we may solve our congestion problems. And here in the city, they had these layers. I don't know about the ventilation that would need to occur down there, but long-range planning is not new, is my point, and how we allocate our land uses and what we decide to do may change over time, but we keep coming back to the drawing board. And I always use the analogy of retirement planning. You know, if you're young, you don't know what you're going to be doing or what the world is going to be like in 20 or 30 years, but you start saving for it, and then you keep coming back to the table every few years to think about whether you need to save more or save less, if your standards of living are changing. And that's what we do in transportation planning. We just keep coming back to the table. Now, I would tell you, and again, for those of you that know your history, the roads used to be for pedestrians. Does anybody think a road is for a pedestrian now? No, and very few drivers behave that way, even when you're just trying to get across. We have definitely gone through this swing of a pendulum to cars are king, but I think we're going to see that pendulum change a little bit. And you know, there are some auto manufacturers that are talking about they're going to be in the fleet vehicle business, but they're kind of done. They're phasing out the sales of personal automobiles. So insurance companies have a business model, because if people aren't owning cars, or they're owning cars with lots and lots of safety features, or they're autonomous vehicles, there is no personal auto insurance, which works for me. And I have a daughter that's going to be driving in a few years, so I'm really excited about that idea. Insurance companies are running models to try and figure out where they're going to head, because they know the auto insurance industry is probably going to go away. So very interesting stuff. Now, so our challenge has to do with the pace of development right now, challenge right now. When a private developer is putting together their financing package and they're getting ready to develop X number of acres of mixed-use commercial something, they're doing that behind closed doors, right? They're trying to put their package together, get their financing, find their partners. Yet over here in the public sector, we're making our plans with public meetings, and everything's out there, and we're forecasting our revenue. We've got our lists, we've got all of our needs identified. And then when they pull the trigger on their plan and they make an announcement, we have to kind of scramble to put the transportation infrastructure in place that will support that. We don't move that quickly in the public sector. And typically, all of our plans, we have a 5-year plan. These are projects that are being built. These are, in the case of some of our interstate, just in this area alone, hundreds of millions of dollars of projects. We can't just all of a sudden stop and go, oh, well, let's not build some of those and go do this. The communication is extremely important, and we spend a lot of time trying to reach out to economic development organizations, developers, to make sure that we sort of have an idea. Institutions, Daytona State or Embry-Riddle, if they're expanding their campus housing, we have to understand what that's going to mean, and how those students are going to be getting to and from, or throughout, or away from campus. So there's a lot of planning that is required, and a lot of communication that is necessary in order to do that. To that extent, we have an annual planning retreat that we do each year. Last year we focused on technology. Was anybody there? Were you there, Pat? Did you get in the Tesla? Did you get to ride the Tesla?
I did not ride.
So we had a demonstration vehicle, the guy drove people around, took his hands off the wheel, and it navigated. It was connected to the traffic signals. It was right here in New Smyrna. The year before we did resiliency. This year we are doing the connection between transportation and economic development. And that'll be at Embry-Riddle, and we'll certainly send the notice out. If any of you are interested, you're welcome to attend. It is extremely important for us to continue to try and stay ahead of that, because catching up is just too much of a challenge. So I don't want to take up all of your time or take up Clay's time. Yes, sir.
Quick question. When a large development is proposed, don't their plans have to come up with some kind of requirements for the environment?
Mm-hmm.
And isn't transportation part of the environment? So how can they get approval unless they can show that transportation and all that's going to be acceptable?
In place.
I'll answer that.
Clay will tackle
Okay.
that during
Okay,
his
I
part.
can give you a quick 30-minute dissertation on it. Well, I'll get to it later.
So let me just go through funding real quickly. We know that we have an issue with transportation funding. And the idea here is most of the fees are gas taxes. They're straight pennies per gallon. And the last time the federal gas tax was raised was in 1993. So the cost of everything's gone up in 25 years, a lot. Now people are indeed, there's more cars on the road, so we are seeing an increase, but the cost, or the increase in revenue is about like this, and the increase in the cost of building infrastructure has an incline like this. So what we're seeing is over the years a bigger growing gap. We also have, again, more electric vehicles, more fuel efficient vehicles, so those pennies aren't collected at the rate that they used to be collected. So again, not since 1993, 90% of the revenue at the federal level is collected that way. So every year we run out of money in the Federal Highway Trust Fund. And every year Congress has to take money out of the general revenue fund to fill that gap. At the state level, we're in better shape, in part because some of the fuel taxes are indexed, so they float with inflation. We also have a lot of different revenue sources, not just one. And so that helps. The challenge at the state level is sometimes, rather than an infusion in, we see a raid going out to balance other parts of the budget. That's a challenge for me just because I'm in transportation, but I think that's a challenge for a voter who thinks that we're paying into a trust fund for transportation, but it's going to some of these other needs. But at the state level, we're in better shape, although, now go ahead.
Go ahead.
There still are some that haven't been raised in a very, very long time. So there are some challenges there as well. So I mentioned at the start of my presentation, we have federal, we have state, and we have local. Federal is got a problem. 25 years of no increases. Does it seem likely that Congress is going to solve that anytime soon? There have been a number of bills over the years put in to try and change that, but they haven't been successful. So if you think that Congress is going to fix our problem, we don't need to worry about transportation funding, right? Because the state trust fund is in pretty good shape. It's the federal piece that's challenged, and I think Clay will tell you the local piece is challenged as well for some of the same reasons. So 2 of the 3 legs of that stool are challenged. Do you want us to have questions now or at the end?
I think we should wait till the end.
So just hold them. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I'm talking about how are we going to pay for growth, the roads additions, because trust me, there's more than just roads that are going to be dealing with this. The
fact is that we all realize there's recreational needs, there's educational needs, there's other societal and just plain infrastructure needs, water, sewer, stormwater, dealing with resiliency resulting from sea level rise. So all of those are things that we at the county are factoring into, the cities are looking at it as well. Tonight I'm just going to be talking about roads. Now when Lois and Sarah Lee and I were getting together, we were kind of talking about how should we go through this. And if you don't mind, I'm going to kind of segue into the 10,000 foot level, look kind of down on it, give it a little bit of an understanding of where we're at. And then from there, we'll go in and we'll get into the nuts and bolts, because I know there's a lot of folks who are interested in about an impact fee or half-cent sales tax and all of that fun stuff. So if you have some patience with me, let me go ahead and jump into the first one. This is from a 2005 study that the East Central Florida Regional Planning Council did, and it was a great study. It was called How Should We Grow? Volusia County did the same thing in 1969. The map that Sarah Lee opened up with was a 1969 version of this 2007. And if you look at the documents, if you go to www.volusia.org, you can get that original How Should We Grow study from 1969. And what you're seeing here, and I know it's hard to see, almost 60% of the 8 counties that make up East Central Florida, which is Marion, Volusia, Brevard, Seminole, Orange, and I can't remember the others right off the top of my head. Roughly 60% will be utilized for urban land. Urban land means single family, commercial, industrial, multifamily. 24% will be in conservation. Almost 19% will be undeveloped, agriculture or other land. And we'll be looking at a density of about 2.15 persons per acre. That is a relatively low density, to be very honest with you, 2.15 per acre on that. It doesn't necessarily drive the transit systems that many of the folks are looking at. So we've got to start looking at what our land uses are going to be, because as Lois pointed out, if you have a spread out community, it costs more to move those people across those miles. That's why it's so cheap in some of the cities, because you've got a condensed population where people have relatively short trips so they can get on those buses or the other paratransit and get to their location quicker. Okay? Before we get into the deeper thing, how many here are like me, a native? All right? How many people came from another part of the country or another area? All right? And the reason we came here was quality of life. Is that a good way to say it? So if we could go there. What is quality of life? Is it the protection of natural resources? Is it the ability to find a good job? Is it the beach, river, shopping, a nice airport? Is it an education system that provides necessary skills and knowledge to our children? Is it no traffic delays? And lastly, is it fresh air, Times Square? Because Oliver Wendell Douglas and his lovely wife asked that same question. Could hit one more time? Green acres. I'm a planning geek. I see planning in everything. Green acres is a perfect example of the dichotomy and the struggle we have. You got Jaja who wants to stay in Times Square and go shopping and see everything she can. Oliver Wendell wants to get out of there and get into the pastoral world of farming. That's the struggle we all face today, because part of us want to have open space, but the cost of that open space can be very, very heavy. And it's kind of interesting. There's a land use attorney out of Kansas. His name's Robert Freilich, and I was lucky enough to hear one of his presentations. And he said everyone in Florida wants to live in a 5-acre ranchette to be able to drive 10 minutes to a very culturally enriching area, park 2 minutes away from their seat so they can see it, and be able to get back home no problem. And I think that's pretty much it. Next, please. So what do we do at Volusia County to help protect our portion of the quality of your life? We plan. We've got a comprehensive plan. We've got the sustainability action plan. We've got the resiliency plan. We've got the dynamic master plan. Okay, please stop real quick. Those are just some of the plans that we're talking about, some of the very specific things. Comprehensive plan takes us from the big 10,000 foot level, and then these individual ones take us down to more specific. The dynamic master plan, which is actually a very good document, and again, I'm a planning geek, I get into it. It may put you all to sleep, but it helps out because it identifies what we as a staff at Volusia County have to do based on what you're telling your elected officials that we have to do. And it's a very good document because it shows you what we're going to be doing. Okay, if we go ahead and hit through the rest of them, the reason there's the TIP that Lois talked about, there's our road program, and then lastly, the long-range transportation plan. I'm talking about roads tonight, so those are the three main issues we're talking about here. This gives us the long-term look. Where are we going to be in that time frame? This gives us what the DOT and the TPO feel like we need to spend. Then that's ours. And I can tell you this much, if you go right now to www.volusia.org or try and find the capital projects that were just presented to the county council at last meeting, you'll see out in the 5-year time frame, 4 and 5 years out, nothing. They're empty cells. We don't have the money. Right now, the funding sources for many of our capital improvements are just not there. So what is the goal? Sustainability. I don't know, again, this has been used in multiple different presentations by every planner across the I'd say across the world. Because you've got environment, economic, and social. And so the whole point of these Venn diagrams is that if you're in this middle, that means you've got a balance of environmental interest, ensuring that you have an economic world that you can live in, and have the social world that you can be proud of. So therefore you have your education, your recreation, your employment, and the protection. And so that is something that's sustainable. That's what we're striving for. And it requires a balance of it. How do we pay for it? And that's the tough part. Next one, roads in Volusia County. We got 2 funding sources, local option gas tax and impact fees. That's it. Ad valorem taxes that you pay on your property taxes don't really go to any of the road improvements. So we are having to deal with what Lois so eloquently said, a flat line, because you're dealing with non-indexed taxes, and then our impact fees. The only time you collect an impact fee is when it's happening, when growth is occurring. If you have no growth, you're not collecting an impact fee. So therefore, it's kind of a conundrum. You need growth to collect the impact fee, but you need the impact fee to build more roads so you can have more growth. So it's kind of that endless circle that we need to work through. This gives you an idea of the gas tax collections. No lie that we had a recession. I can tell you that the impact fee collections were lower than that. This kind of plays off of the slide that Lois was showing in regards to how we can use it. When you see the total amount that's charged on the gas tax, we at the local level have a relatively limited amount of use of what we can allocate. So we do have our local option, and we have maxed that out here in Volusia County to try and get as much money as we can, not just for maintenance, but for some minor improvements and minor expansions, and we're trying to draw upon that to help us out. Impact fees. I've seen a lot of y'all at some of the zone impact fees that were held when we were making a discussion about the proposed ordinance that was adopted on December 4th, 2018, and will go into effect March 4th, 2019. Impact fees are not necessarily based on rules, they're based on court cases. What you'll see is that there's statutory things that are contained in Florida statutes that tell local governments how to do them. But how to really do them was worked out through the courts. You'll hear attorneys spill out the name Nolan and Dolan cases. And basically what they're saying is that you have to use them in a confined area. And so that's why we have 4 impact fee zones here in Volusia County. We are real imaginative. They're northeast, southeast, northwest, southwest. And so what they are basically doing, they're giving us the ability to collect an impact fee for that specific area and be able to administer it so we can provide the facilities that are needed in that zone. It's the same impact fee because it's based on costs and a variety of other things. If y'all want to see the mathematical equation, I'll be glad to do so, but most of the time people throw things at me when I put that up on the screen. But there are restrictions that impact these, how we can spend these things. Like that next one. This is the dual rational nexus. That was taught to me by several different attorneys to make sure we utilize this. If we don't have an impact fee that matches this, it will be thrown out by the courts. Need. Need development creates a need, and the fee is proportional to the capacity consumed by the new development. What does that mean? We can't overcharge development. We cannot go in there and say, yeah, the cost of the road is going to be $5 million per lane mile, which is a real number. So we want you to pay all, like 10 million, because we think you're going to create it. No, we have to tie it back to the actual cost that they are going to have to deal. And the benefit has to be directly related to that development. That's why we have those zones. So that way, if you don't collect an impact fee in Ormond Beach and spend it over in Pearson. So therefore, if you're collecting an impact fee here in New Smyrna Beach, it's going to be allocated to that zone. This gives you an idea between 2012 and 2016 what we collected in the credits. Getting back to your question, when someone comes in for a development, first thing they do is they open up the future land use map. Okay, where's it at? Tell them the future land use kind of gives you what? Commercial, residential, what densities. Then they look at the zoning. The zoning tells you how. Maximum building height, setbacks, parking requirements, landscape requirements. And this little thing called the traffic impact analysis that you have to provide, in which you have to go out and you hire a firm that like the one I used to work for and Lois used to work for, and they go out and they do the analysis and they say, here are all the roads we're impacting. And some of these roads are over capacity. So how can we correct that? And that's where we at the local government say, all right, if you put a new signal here and a turn lane here and you do this here, then the system will return back to equilibrium. So we have to give credits for those dollars that they spend for those improvements. And if they happen on one of our thoroughfare roads, which is where we can only spend our impact fees, we have to give them credits. So what you're seeing here is in this time frame, development came in and we collected $5,400,000 of cash. They wrote a check for an impact fee for a thoroughfare road, for county roads only. Then what happened was there were credits that were used, which is a good thing, because credits they're good because they get stuff built quickly, but they stay on the books, and it keeps you from getting cash. So as soon as we can get the credits taken care of, then we can start seeing more cash coming in. So what you're seeing is that there's a considerable number of credits there. Zone 2, where New Smyrna Beach is in, you're around $2 million on both of those. What you're seeing over here in Zone 3, which is primarily Deltona, you got $3 million paid, not many credits because candidly there's not many county roads in that area. Zone 4, which is DeLand and upwards up into Pearson, again, same situation. You don't have as many county roads, and so therefore you're seeing that we were able to get more cash. These are some of the improvements we did. And in some of the discussions, and I'm going to go back, and pardon me for going back in a little bit of history. If you just are trying to build a program off of taking in $1,000, $2,000 with each new house, you're not going to get the money to build the roads you need. So you have to front that money somehow, and we did that. It was a very intelligent thing to do, because in 2005, growth was just going through the roof. And we said if we didn't get ahead of that curve, we were going to be sorely behind. It's going to be real bad. So let's go ahead and issue a $60 million bond, and we will start building the roads now, and we'll repay it with the impact fees we collect. That was in 2006. In 2008, oh wow, things changed. And so we were able to get ahead, and we got some of these roads built before we would even have the $14 million in Zone 1, before we had the $1.3 million in Zone 2, before we had the $7 million in Zone 3, $345,000. But what you're seeing is that we were able to do so. Now that things are coming back online, we're able to retire the debt. It's going to be put to rest, I think, in 2030, if I remember correctly. And then we'll be able to have more money from gas tax and impact fees allocated to road construction. I can go on to the next one. So getting back to the rational nexus and some of the other legal issues we face, they can only be used on thoroughfare roads. Volusia County has a thoroughfare road map. It identifies what roads are owned, maintained as county roads for their thoroughfare system. So it provides connectivity between all the cities in all of Volusia County, but they're not state roads, because we cannot use impact fees on state roads. We can't use them for maintenance, so we're not going to go and pave your local road with a impact fee fund. And lastly, and this is the toughest one, we can't be using them to correct existing deficiencies. So what we do is we go back to this map that we have in our comprehensive plan, and it shows what our future lanes are going to be like in 2025. And that's the basis for which we are utilizing it. If we're dealing with a project which isn't on there, it's going to be hard to say that it's not a deficiency. This is a great picture, and it just demonstrates what Lois was saying. You can't build yourself out of congestion. And that's in Houston. That's a 26-lane freeway. You got 6 lanes one way, 6 lanes the other way. You got 8 feeder lanes and 6 managed lanes, which they try and use for transit and high occupancy vehicles. There's a similar like one in Canada. There's, I mean, if we were reading through how many of these 20-plus lane roads are out there. So that is not going to be a reality here. Good thing, just for everybody's information. Lois was very accurate in saying that places like Ormond Beach, Port Orange, New Smyrna Beach, DeLand have all said, we don't want that in our city. So therefore, Granada will not be anything more than 4 lanes. Right now, Dunlawton is stuck at where it's going to be in theory. 44, y'all know what the rules are on that. So what you're seeing, and again, I would have to be remiss to talk about, you know, downtown DeLand, where they've been able to preserve Woodland Boulevard, and it's still really a 2-lane downtown feel. When we were going through the impact fee discussion, there was a lot of folks who were saying, man, we need to raise the impact fee to slow things down. Some of the highest impact fees are in the most desirable places to be. It didn't do anything to slow the growth down. So the fact is we're legally constrained on how much we can develop as far as an impact fee, but also, as the APA said, it's an effective tool for ensuring adequate infrastructure, but it shouldn't be thought of to stop growth, because it can't do neither. They're not the panacea to give us money, and they're not going to be the tool to slow things down. All they are is one of the many different arrows we have in our quiver to pay for these roadways. If I could have the next one. This is an interesting set of maps. And it's kind of my segue into the next thing. Many people are asking about what's happening with the half-cent sales tax, what's going on, what projects are going to be happening if this gets passed, if we get it. And this is just a quick spitball that all the city managers did as part of their managers roundtable. There's an organization once a month they get together, and it's all the city managers and the county management get together, and they just talk about what's going on in their respective spheres of influence. And when the whole decision about going forward with the half-cent sales tax from back in May, this was the concept of what they were talking about. So this gives you an idea of all of the different roadways we're talking about. So here you see West Volusia, here you see East Volusia. So you see things along 44, you see Williamson, you see LPGA, you see the, 40 widening, Hand Avenue, a variety of different projects coming in that folks at the local level would like to use those funds for. This is not the final list. This has not been determined to be the final thing. It just got an idea where everybody was talking, so that way if there was some shared interest, we could talk about what we could do. And when we were talking about all the different plans, it's really important to understand federal and state agencies like giving money to local governments when they have their act together. So if you have a plan and you can sit there and show, I'm ready to go, I've got 5 years, I'll give you a 10%, 20% match, come help us. We'll have a great photo op for every elected official once this road is in. So therefore, it's really important to make sure that we have these plans. They're able to come forward and give us the information so that we can partner with, cities can partner with counties. Counties can partner with the TPO, DOT, feds. So we can get that respective pool of money to get these things moving. Because if you just try and do one project on your own, you're gonna be in a world of hurt. What are alternatives for funding roads? And I want y'all to go on Google and just type in, you can see, I said, how to pay for roads in America, and just start reading through it. And you will get the full spectrum from super libertarian of like, who cares? To the super left, which is like, everyone needs to pay everything they have to for this road. And it's a very interesting dichotomy. But the one thing that's kind of common throughout is a concept of a user fee. So everybody wants a user fee, it's just coming up with how you can do it. So what are we looking at? And this is the boring part. I don't have any neat little pictures or maps. This is straight wording out of the May 1st, 2018 agenda item, which was pertaining to the discussion about the half-cent sales tax. This gives you what we're going to do as far as levy, the distribution, and with the use of it. So what you're seeing, it can be used for roads, sidewalks, bridges, water quality, stormwater, and flood control. They cannot be used for mass transit, rail, or any other project allowed herein. So what you're seeing is that the cities came to the county and said, we need to do something. We need this thing, and you have to help us. The county said, okay, great. We want to see y'all support us, and we will help you. May 1st, we all get together. Then all of a sudden there was the issue about whether or not we're charging enough impact fees. Let's put it on hold. Let's get the impact fees taken care of, and then we'll revisit it. Would you go to the next one? There'll be an advisory review committee. It will be made up of citizens appointed who will review that maps and all the other things that the cities came up with to come up with what could be utilized if this half-cent sales tax is passed. Could we go to the next one? That's the question. That's the question that if the county council, at the recommendations of the cities, decides to hold a vote on a half-cent sales tax, that would be it. This is referencing May 1st. If you go online right now, you'll see for the February 5th new ordinance that's basically the same language. So on February 5th, the county council will be reviewing whether or not they want to see.
And the date for the new one?
So is there going to be a half-cent sales tax? As my friend sits there and says, I don't know. I really don't. But if you come to February 5th, you'll be able to get some better answers on that. Okay?
But isn't there gonna have to then be a vote?
Oh, yeah. And just as a little bit of a side note on that, last week, Senator Brandis, who represents St. Pete, put in a bill. It's not, doesn't have a companion bill yet in the House, but what it was saying is any local effort to increase taxes has to be, that would be require a referendum, would have to go on the general election. You could no longer have special elections. We don't know what the impacts of that means to us, but I can tell you that we are very aware of it. That's why if the thing happens on February 5th, and if our county council decides to vote that way, the date is May 21st. And it would be a mail-out ballot, which typically has some of the best responses. So we will get a true temperature of how the citizens feel. Eric?
How did they determine that the gasoline sales tax could not be spent on the one thing, one of the several things that would eliminate our traffic problems, which is transit and rail?
Okay, let me clarify one of the problems.
Is there a state law that forbids you from being smart?
Well, there's two things. No, we can be dumb on our own. First and foremost, there's a little discussion our council's having with DOT over a thing called Sunrail. And so there's a concern that anything that's allocated towards rail could be misconstrued that we are willing to pay for Sunrail and alleviate the federal government from doing what they were obligated to do with the original agreement. So this is again one of those pesky little legal things. And then in regards to transit, there's a Candidly, there's not a lot of sympathy for transit in regards to the concept that it's already federally funded and the majority of the money is coming from outside sources, so therefore, I'm worried more about my roads. And if you look at where other counties, Seminole County has been very successful with this, Pinellas County, Hillsborough just passed one. You have to give them very specific projects. Give y'all very specific projects so that you know that your money's going to something that will benefit you, plain and simple. So therefore, if I'm in there and got my ballot that's been mailed to me and I'm getting ready to fill it out, I can see that I know that, oh, Clyde Morris is gonna be wide. All right, I'm in for that because I drive that every day to work and it's just a pain in the neck. I need some improvements there. Oh, okay, my daughter goes to DSC, so they're gonna be doing something over here. You buy into it, you understand it, it's something you can grab onto and see. So therefore, that's why you see that if we are more specific and give everyone a clear expectation where that money is, instead of just something of saying transit, it'll give people at least the ability to focus in on whether or not they really want to support it. Yes, ma'am.
Do you see water quality issues being, in the general discussion going on that ballot, or going on the
I can tell you right
proposed?
now, every city, and part of the county are looking at water quality issues. It's a critical part of our infrastructure is really, really dependent on water quality. I have to give my tip of the hat to Mike Ulrich, who's our Director of Utilities. That man has been able to leverage and pull money out of DEP in St. John's for a variety of things that have done fantastic things for water quality. Advanced treatment, so therefore the reused water that's coming out can be utilized on lawns, so therefore we're looking at it as an alternative source for irrigation. All of those things are critical. Stormwater, updating it so we don't get the algae blooms in the mosquito lagoon. All of those things are critical. Trying to do something with the septic tanks, and I can tell you, I know everyone down in Edgewater and Oak Hill are concerned about it. Similar problems we're running over in West Volusia, where you have 6,000 septic tanks draining into Blue Springs. So, yep. But hold on, Pat was there, if you don't mind.
Do you have a date for when the project list will be complete?
I do not. That's, and they're taking baby steps, as you know, they said, what about Bob? Baby steps. So what you're seeing is that the managers are going to get back together, the elected officials are going to bless the list. We realize we have to have a list in order for this thing to go out. So it will be developed, I'd say, very quickly. I haven't heard the exact date. Yes, ma'am, you've been very patient.
Are you planning on using any roundabouts? Because they cut down the cost in the future, and they slow traffic. Collisions are side collisions, not head-ons. They keep traffic moving and they keep gas fumes from going out into the air.
Yes, ma'am, you're right. And I can tell you this much, we have to look, it'll have to be right now I can't say that there's anything specifically about a roundabout on any of the projects being submitted by the city or from the county, because right now, the actual intersection improvements would have to be studied. If it's a situation where the intersection would benefit with a roundabout, we'll definitely be looking at that as an alternative.
I can put the two roads if you're moving. I think they're talking around about.
Yeah, DOT, back about, when was that, 6 years ago? Yeah, because when, what's his name? They've had so many districts, or DOT secretaries up in Tallahassee, he was like mandating at least one roundabout in each district per year. Yes, Eric?
I know that the state imposes all sorts of bizarre rules on what you can and can't do. But for instance, you have Dunlawton Boulevard with a median in the center, and they water the median. They actually water Dunlawton more than water the median. But why isn't that a swale? Why is that a raised curve? Why isn't that water sent into there to be pre-treated before it, winds up going into a storm sewer? And then you don't have to water the stuff. And why do they plant grass instead of things that don't need watering, you know?
Well, up where you used to live on US 1,
Yeah.
all the swales, they don't have curves.
Right.
They got, and they're all centered, and that's where it drains into.
Right.
That's because it's a rural section. Once you start getting into an urban section, in order to have a median, you have to have a type F curve with a design speed of 45 miles an hour, and you have trees planted so many feet off of the center of the curve.
So this
So
is a state rule.
it is a DOT standard. I don't know what the index page is, but it's pretty close.
So we're stuck.
Oh, no, there
Not
can,
trees to water.
well, I'm gonna tell you something, and this is an experience that, when Bill Butler was a landscape architect at Ormond Beach and I was there, we tried doing xeriscaping in our medians. We did not put St. Augustine sod, we put 100% native species, and the public went crazy because it was ugly in their mind. So medians in State Road 40 were replanted with St. Augustine sod, and we ran the reuse lines out there because folks at that time, the public opinion, said, we want color, we want St. Augustine sod, and the elected officials said, we have too many complaints, give them what they want.
Well, I know you put swales along Beach Street, everybody who had a house thought that they looked countrified and didn't look right.
Right. So, you know, efficiency and beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Go ahead.
Would you explain how the money will be distributed?
Yes, ma'am. It's going to be distributed by currently how we do the local option gas tax, which is based on population information.
Okay, I mean division of the percentage. 48% is going to the county,
Yeah, based on
and then it's all based on population. So how much percentage is a town like Oak Hill and Pearson going to receive?
I don't know off the top of my head, but I can get you
They're
that.
not going to get that much. Well, I was part of the Mayor's Roundtable all last year,
Right.
so I was part of all that conversation. So I do know, because I live between Edgewater and Oak Hill, and I know the mayor of Oak Hill's not happy.
Yeah, Doug is, well, the thing about it is this. The county is aware that there's gonna be some areas which may not have the money, but if they're willing to partner with the county and it's a county facility, we can help out. And I can tell you this more, George Rechtenwald, those who don't know him, you need to meet him, he's a great guy. I'm very happy that he was, you know, given the chance to be our manager. The thing about it is he's a road and bridge guy. That's what he came into, so I can promise you this much. If this passes, he will make sure it's gonna be done right.
Okay, because there are a lot of county roads in those areas.
Yes, there are.
In Pearson as well as Oak Hill.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Yes, sir.
Yes, when Lois, the very first slide, Lois showed the MOP. On the top of it, it had the MOP by federal law must be involved in the planning of development. Now, what I'm wondering is, if I'm a developer, and I'm presenting a development plan to the city or the county, does the MOP have the right to say, this is way too big, way too much, we can stop that, or they not?
They don't have permitting rights, but I'll let her take it.
Yeah, unfortunately, we are not a land use planning. Those are regional planning councils. They get to make land use decisions and comments. We only deal with the transportation, the roadway or transit network that's associated with it. So we do have some limits. So if a part of a development does include a proposal to widen a road that impacts the community, that is where we would probably get involved if there was a dispute there. And Clay mentioned transportation impact analyses. We came up with a common framework for everyone to use to assess the impacts and to ensure that if Daytona is planning a development and Ormond is their neighbor and their development is going to impact Ormond, that before they agree to any of the development, they have to communicate with and work with Ormond to make sure that they're not negatively impacted by something that they won't gain any benefit from.
So if just, real quick, just, if I were a developer and I was going to develop something that needed a wider road, but I don't put that in my plan, you're gonna be looking at the plan and you're gonna be saying, now, you need a bigger road.
We don't have review we're not in the
You
review,
would-
by
that would-
law, not in the review process. That would be the city or
That
the
would be
county
you. So you-
or the
yeah,
Department
you
of
would see that,
Transportation.
You would say, Al, you need a bigger road.
Well, I'm gonna editorialize here, and I'm going to kind of give you a quick history about growth management.
Okay.
In 1985, there was a group called ELMS, the Environmental Land, I can't remember what the acronym stood for, but they made a recommendation, and there was a state law passed, and they said, thou shalt plan, every city, every county in Florida, you will create a plan. You will have 9 elements in that plan. It will be everything from land use, capital improvement, coastal management, conservation, and you will have financial feasibility to make sure that you can do this. And you will implement a thing called concurrency. And concurrency means that a project can't be approved unless the infrastructure that you set level of services for are in place and they don't negatively impact that. And so we went from 1985 till about 2010. And that was kind of in there, and there was all kinds of different deviations and permutations and combinations. And in 2010, they went, nah, that's okay.
You know, this is an amazing conversation, and we have a time certain tonight because we're in a library and they will be closing. But I think this is a conversation we're going to want to continue to have, a dialogue. But until we can do this, please give a round of applause.